let's continue the review, and then we're going to be getting to the covenant and a lot more details of the covenant when we get to chapter 11.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm sorry, but if you could help me out here, they're actually you're recognizing a gap between that 69th week and the 70th.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
You've actually got two gaps in here.
Okay.
One is the gap to the coming of the Antichrist, which starts when he confirms the covenant, right? Mm-hmm. Which starts that 70th week. Mm-hmm. But the other is a gap to the city and the temple destroyed.
Right, right.
And the reason I mention that is that is specifically listed here, mm-hmm. and yet the timing is not accounted for in Scripture. So.
Well, that's... I don't know if you want to answer that, Phil, but if you look at our chart here, you see the cross of Christ. You've got to go, and this is why I think they're pretty hard-pressed who want to make a great deal of light about a gap, because in any view, be it the amillennial view or the pre-millennial view, on any view and on any reckoning, you've got to go outside of this 70 weeks to have the destruction of Jerusalem. And if you make Christ the one that takes away the sacrifice, I think that's a great error. But if you do, you've still got a gap, because Jerusalem wasn't destroyed for another 36 more years, 40 years. And here's the point. But if we understand the destruction of Jerusalem, which clearly happens, like our brother says, a gap outside of this, and we do regard that as a fulfillment of Scripture, but only in a typical way. The future desolation of Jerusalem, which is still future from that time, actually is in the middle of the week. So if we take that as only a type and not the exhaustive final fulfillment, then really the destruction of Jerusalem that we're speaking about, that's going to bring on the last desolation, that destruction happens within the middle of the last week. And in that sense, if this is a mere type, then you're not talking about anything there's still continuity. Everything particular to this vision is within this 70 weeks.
But you're talking about a sentence which is a type that actually historically happened.
It's certainly historical. So that we're going to talk about Antiochus Epiphanes.
With that particular gap a little bit, but that's all right. I don't want to derail this.
Well, gaps, we got them everywhere. We got them between the Roman Empire. You've got them with Antiochus Epiphanes. There's going to be gaps in the book of Daniel. That's part of what we're wrestling with, the mystery here. And that's part of what has made commentators actually take types and make them the exhaustive fulfillment and say maybe something will happen in the future that's sort of like, and they're not interested in the details. They're interested in broad strokes. And we're saying every detail of this prophecy has got to be fulfilled and accounted for. There's too much in antiquity that cannot be accounted for, that do not answer to the particulars. And even teachers that don't even have our view grant us that much. They say, hey, we're having trouble having this fit. Now, certainly, without contest, the destruction of Jerusalem happened in 70 A.D., but the destruction of Jerusalem and the age-long dispersion of the Jews was not particularly clearly seen in the Old Testament. It's only come to light with the fulfillment. But what was clearly seen in the Old Testament was a future last 3.5 years that starts when when this covenant's violated. There's a final destruction and desolation of Jerusalem that ends in the return of Christ and the resurrection. That is clear. The other is, it has to be a type. As sure as there's a future abomination, here's our argument. As surely as the abomination didn't happen in 70 A.D., and there's such a case for that, then so surely we have to understand there's a future destruction of Jerusalem. So therefore, the final destruction of Jerusalem cannot be in 70 A.D. There's got to be another destruction of Jerusalem. So if we find a gap, we have to make a gap.
And that's why we read from Zechariah 14 this morning. The city will be taken,
captured, and so on. And the whole Old Testament sees Jerusalem in desolation when the Lord returns. It's everywhere. Every prophet talks about it at length.
Okay, back to the paraphrase. Just to wrap this up. So the Antichrist will confirm a covenant, or make firm a covenant with many for 1/7, the last piece of prophetic time, the last 7 years. a period of grave tribulation, which the focus of that grave tribulation is the last 3.5 years of that. But in the middle of the 7, after 3.5 years, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And just as Antiochus Epiphanes and Titus Vespasianus did before him, and on a wing of the rebuilt end-time temple, is this one translation, he, the Antichrist, will set up an abomination that causes desolation, a false god, or an image, until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. And that is until this man of sin is destroyed by the brightness of Jesus' coming, and he, the Messiah, shall reign forever and ever. Now, this will be clarified more as we get to Daniel chapter 11. But let's turn the page, and you've got in front of you Daniel the prophet, the final vision.